Good evening to you. Thank you for being here with us on From the South. My name is Regan Devines. We begin with this evening's headlines. Venezuela's oil workers reject opposition proposals. Thousands march in support of the president. Argentina's Mauricio Macri swears in his new cabinet and meets with former presidential candidates. And no climate deal yet, but global leaders say Saturday will be the day. The details on these stories and more now. Workers from Venezuela's oil industry marched across Venezuela in support of the government and in defiance of the opposition's triumph in Sunday's parliamentary elections. The workers of the state-owned PDVSA fear that opposition lawmakers will try to intervene in the oil company. PDVSA and the Venezuelan oil industry together account for around a third of the country's GDP. The government has always directed a large amount of the revenues from the company to social welfare projects.
We the people have a clear message for the Venezuelan opposition. From we the workers of the oil industry, do not be confused and manage things well, because the people of Venezuela is not willing to lose all of the achievements reached throughout these past years under socialist governments. And we the oil industry workers have done our best to bring all the benefits to the people. Venezuela is Venezuela, and the PDVSA is never going back to the hands of the opposition.
And the marches come after the Venezuelan opposition published a list of laws that it wants to pass or overturn, which would dramatically change the country's political and social landscape. The first proposal on the MUD's website is to revoke the fair prices and food security laws, which aim to provide Venezuelans with cheap access to basic necessities. The opposition says this would overcome the problem of shortages. Two other laws would open the way to privatizations. One would reverse the nationalization of strategic enterprises. Another would, quote, decentralize public services, handing them over to local authorities and giving these the right to subcontract private service providers. A third law in this area would open up concessions for large infrastructure projects to foreign investors and multilateral financing institutions. The problem of crime would be tackled by giving more power to municipal and state police forces, which are often controlled by opposition local governments. Back in 2002, it was the municipal police in Caracas that played a key role in the failed coup attempt against President Hugo Chavez. And on the media, the opposition majority in parliament proposes a law to, quote, end hegemony in the public media and ensure, quote, the independence of those in charge of those media outlets. And as a response to this set of proposals, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has called for a popular economic congress next Wednesday to formulate strategies to move forward following Sunday's electoral defeat. On Thursday, Maduro spoke to participants attending the country's Community Congress, where he took on a tone of self-reflection, calling on his party and its supporters to examine the reasons behind the defeat. Hundreds of people from various social movements and collectives took part in the Congress to reflect on the loss and to unite around an agenda in order to move the socialist movement forward in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America. Since the loss, Maduro has reshuffled and restructured his cabinet and vowed to veto potential amnesty laws from the opposition. He has also announced plans to sign into law a decree to protect workers across the country for the next 3 years. Across Venezuela, activists are responding to the call from President Maduro to come together and debate. Today, journalists gathered at a special assembly defending the anti-V news outlet that opposition leader Henry Ramos Alup announced that he wanted closed. Telesuro's Isabel Finbo has more.
¡Viva la patria bolivariana! ¡Viva! ¡Viva el heroico pueblo de Venezuela!
Journalists and communications workers have united to discuss the next steps following the ruling Socialist Party's electoral defeat. They've come to defend Venezuelan media, which has radically changed in the last 16 years. Having been dominated by private opposition-orientated media outlets, there's been a push towards the democratization of communications, widening the scope to different perspectives to the ones offered by mainstream private media.
Popular communication is like journalists, but from the community, or rather all of the people from the neighborhoods, from the communities, from the urbanizations. All these people take part in popular communication for their own communities.
Participants are gathering signatures in support of ANTV, the National Assembly news station that has been threatened with closure by opposition leaders. Venezuela's parliament has now passed a motion to hand ownership of the channel to its employees to protect it from being shut down.
We are signing this document hundreds of communicators and people because in revolution, the people became communicators. That was one of the greatest achievements of the Bolivarian revolution. Now communication is not in the exclusive hands of big businesses or owners of the media. Whether it's radio or television or press, today communication is free.
As well as debate and reflection, the journalists are here to show that they are not afraid of the opposition coalition MUD, in spite of what they see as threats to freedom of expression.
They shouldn't be afraid. Journalists should not be afraid because they have the most beautiful task, that is expression and liberty.
The opposition candidates started to threaten the laws of popular power. We went out on the streets in an effort to organize ourselves and to work on an immediate proposal to see into the situation.
I'm here now in Plaza Bolivar, where the Assembly of Journalists Communicators has gathered to talk about the way forward after the electoral defeat on Sunday. They're here talking about how they're going to defend their right to freedom of expression, and people here gathering signatures in defence of ANTV, which is the National Assembly television station, which has been threatened with closure. Now, meetings like this are being echoed all around the city, where you've got street meetings taking place, or they're calling them the street parliament. Another meeting taking place today is the workers' meeting, the community council meetings. You can feel like the engagement here is really strong, and people are really getting involved and participating in politics after the election, trying to move the revolution forward. I'm Isabel Fimbo Teresor in Caracas.
Panama's former president, Ricardo Martinelli, has appeared in front of a Panamanian Supreme Court to answer allegations of illegal spying by his administration during his time in office. Martinelli is also facing trial in relation to an insider trading scandal for which he was stripped of his immunity by the Supreme Court. The multimillionaire supermarket tycoon and former president left Panama in January and is now in Miami. Apart from the espionage case, he is facing half a dozen corruption probes, including charges of embezzlement, taking bribes, and selling pardons. Drug traffickers are exercising influence over domestic policies in Peru in order to protect themselves from judicial prosecution. This is according to a long investigation by a legislative commission led by progressive lawmaker Rosa Mavila. The report says that criminal groups are looking to fund electoral campaigns to buy influence and are even showing an interest in creating political parties of their own. The report recommends the immediate removal of lawmakers under investigation and urges that the financial investigative body freeze the suspects' bank accounts. Mavila is seeking to create another commission to investigate the infiltration of drug trafficking into armed forces. Argentina's new president, Mauricio Macri, has sworn in his new cabinet. The ceremony took place in the Casa Rosada presidential palace with wide media coverage. Macri's cabinet has been criticized for its links with transnational corporations and for already making announcements that are creating a hike in prices. And former presidential candidate from the opposition's Front for Victory party, Daniel Scioli, met with President Macri in Casa Rosada, where they were joined by Sergio Massa, the third most voted candidate. During a press conference after the meeting, Scioli said that he had raised his concerns regarding Macri's policies and their effect on unemployment and on social welfare. As a new round of Colombian peace talks kicked off in Havana, the FARC guerrilla made a new proposal to advance in the agenda. After a year and a half of negotiating the issue of victims' reparation, the FARC has proposed a collective apology from both the government and the armed rebels for the damage they caused throughout the conflict. The FARC also reminded of the importance of making structural changes that guarantees the basic rights of Colombians, as the beginning of this new round coincided with the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
These rights and liberties are as relevant today as when 67 years ago the Universal Declaration was approved. The state has to guarantee their fulfillment, which until now has not happened, with very tragic consequences for those in Colombia that continue to suffer a war that has lasted over half a century. It can well be stopped if those who govern finally decide to redistribute wealth and provide the basic needs for the people. If they choose to open paths towards a greater democracy and stop once and for all the dirty war and persecution against popular leaders.
Honduras was shocked on Thursday with the news of the murder of soccer star Arnold Peralta. The soccer player was shot in the parking lot of a shopping center in La Ceiba. Police are still investigating and reviewing footage from the mall's security system and are trying to determine a motive. No arrests have yet been made. At the COP21 Climate Change Summit in Paris, France, delegations have not been able to reach a global agreement on climate change, postponing the presentation of a new version of the draft text to Saturday. One of the biggest points of contention seems to be the disparity between developed versus developing countries with respect to carbon emissions. Developing countries say that rich nations have not shown any flexibility, adding that they should be exempt from the same ambitious carbon reductions that rich countries are required to, given the historic disparity between both sets of nations.
So I'm not engaged in negotiation as a Secretary General of the United Nations. I'm urging the negotiators to make their decision based on global vision. This is not a moment of talking about national perspectives. Good global solution will help good local solution.
And for more on the pending issues which will be negotiated in Paris, we turn to our correspondent there, Luis Arroyo.
The deadline set by the United Nations to deliver a global binding agreement on climate change has been extended. The French presidency, which is chairing the summit, say that things are moving in the right direction. However, experts consider that more compromise is needed if an agreement is to be reached.
That Paris is an important moment, but it's not the end. And that we will continue. We're not going to get everything. We're not going to necessarily get a strong outcome. We already.
The final draft, in which the 195 delegations are working now, has left out very important issues. One is how will countries pay for efforts to reduce, stop, and cope with the effects of climate change. And the second is if the aim will be to limit global rises in temperature to 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5.
And what we have seen is that with every iteration of the text, ambition has been lowered down. So when it comes to climate finance, when it comes to the need to review mechanisms and review the ambition over time, we have seen that the ambition has also been going down. And we have seen with the issue of rights that in the very day of international human rights, the reference to human rights and rights for people have been removed from the text.
But even as civil society and social movements do not agree with the procedures, officials praise the efforts and achievements reached so far during the negotiations, based on the fact that all the points on the agenda have been addressed.
So and currently all that topics are in the text, in the draft text. So I do think that really this process, it is respecting also the expectation of civil society, of indigenous people, of women, and I hope that as part of the negotiation we can maintain that kind of topics in the final agreement that we will adopt by tomorrow, December 9.
Delay in the Paris climate talks is not surprising. It's also due to the fact that some nations are still unhappy with the text. And much more compromise will be needed to bring this historic deal to a final agreement.
And we underline that for us it's crucial to retain in the text the limit of 1.5 as the most and a clear pathway to achieve that goal of temperature, but also a clear commitment from developed countries that they will be providing the support as technology transfer, capacity building.
Without an agreement and the frustration of being pushed out of the discussion, activists have reached the entrance of the COP21. With optimism, negotiators aim to wrap up a global agreement to curb climate change. They said these have been the most difficult but the most important discussions for humanity. Luis Arroyo, Telesur, Paris.
According to reports, the mayor of Mosul in Iraq has invited Turkey to send some of their troops across the border. However, Iraq's prime minister isn't happy about it. Prime Minister Haider Abadi has ordered that a complaint be filed with the UN Security Council for what he calls a violation of Iraqi sovereignty by Turkey. Mosul's mayor Athil al-Mujaifi, however, said that Iraq needs all the help it can get to defeat Islamic State group, which has a stronghold in Mosul. The area is mainly controlled by the Kurds, and Turkey's intervention could spark ethnic tensions. Violent clashes erupted after demonstrations in Silwad, north of Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank. A 22-year-old Palestinian man was killed in the fighting. The victim was Uday Jihad Urshaid, who had lost his 17-year-old sister 6 weeks ago. She died while trying to stab an Israeli soldier. Palestinians were protesting with the hope that Israeli officials would hand over the dead body of another Palestinian. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Hamas has staged a march in commemoration of its 28th anniversary. Noha Razin has been following this. She filed this report.
The Islamist Hamas movement staged Friday a central rally in the Gaza Strip, marking the 28th anniversary of its founding and in support of Jerusalem's uprising. Several thousand Hamas supporters, including men, women and children, waving green flags and chanting for resistance, took part in the massive marches that launched across the coastal enclave after the Friday prayer, aimed wide presence of Hamas's leaders and officials.
We are here today to celebrate the foundation of the Islamic movement of Hamas as Palestinian resistance. While a lot thinks that we are Islamic terrorists, in fact we are just Muslim resistant fighters.
Hamas has fought 3 wars with Israel since it gained power of the Gaza Strip in 2006. An over 50-day devastating Israeli offensive in Gaza last year resulted in the deaths of more than 2,000 Palestinians and the wounding of dozens of thousands of people. Noha Razin, Telesur TV, Gaza.
Here now is a brief look at other news stories around the world.
An Algerian-Irish man has been arrested by Spanish authorities. His name is Ali Sharif Damashi, and he is wanted by the U.S. for alleged crimes of conspiracy to provide support for terrorists. Officials believe he recruited to the Al-Qaeda Maghreb Islamic group. He will soon be extradited to the United States. The U.S. has contributed tactical war equipment to Cameroon, which includes high-technology combat vehicles and high-powered generators. The U.S. ambassador there, Michael Hoser, says it is to assist in the fight against Islamic militant group Boko Haram. This follows the arrival of 300 troops there, also to help in the fight. And New Zealand may be removing Britain's Union Jack from its national banner, maybe to replace it with a silver fern on a black and blue background. According to preliminary results released by the country's Electoral Commission, the new design was one of 4 voted on during a nationwide referendum. A second referendum will take place in March 2016.
UEFA President Michel Platini has failed in his bid to have his 90-day provisional ban from football lifted. Platini's request was denied in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which means that the 60-year-old will not be allowed to attend the Euro 2016 finals draw in Paris on Saturday. Platini, along with the former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, will have personal hearings with FIFA's Ethics Committee next week following allegations of corruption. More on these and other stories. For more on these, please feel free to join us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. And for extensive coverage of developing stories, you can visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. From our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Regan Devines. Tonight we leave you with the music of French-Argentine singer, songwriter, composer, and actor. He's also considered the most prominent figure in the history of tango, Carlos Gardel. He would have been 125 years old today. Have a great weekend. Enjoy.
En el mundo no cabía toda la humilde alegría de mi pobre corazón. Ahora, cuesta abajo en mi rodada, las ilusiones pasadas yo no las puedo arrancar.